Isn't this kind of what's going on? We're dealing with these folks, and rather than them listening to us, they often get worse. They often start arguing for the very behavior we want them to change. Plus, would it be fair to say that also we kind of sometimes feel a little resentful in dealing with these folks? There's a quote on resentment you might like that says, resentment is like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. I love that quote because I think it really captures what this looks like and what it feels like. Resentful, frustrated, angry, very understandable. But rather than it helping us deal with the situation, what it does is give this person a reason to get worse or to defend the very behavior we want them to change. So what I want to do today is bring you new information about how to break this cycle. I think this new information is really important, so I'm not just telling you what you already know. Matter of fact, there's a quote from Albert Einstein that I love that says, problems cannot be solved at the same level of awareness that created them. That's why I think it's my job as a speaker and a psychologist and a corporate trainer to bring you new information. My new information has to do with how the brain processes data. So I'm going to offer this solution in our time period today in two ways. Number one, I want to show you how to interact with this person because we can't not interact with them. We're just going to deal with them on a daily basis. But how can we interact with them in a way where we don't take on their stuff, where we don't let them affect us? I call it living life or dealing with people so that no person can stress you out, jerk your chain, or rattle your cage. Now, if you just walked away with that, that would probably be worth your hour, don't you think? So I'm going to show you how to do that, and then I want to give you information, okay, if you want to go beyond just not being affected by this person, if you actually want to influence them to shift from this lower 20% to the upper 80%, how do you do that? So, in order to deal with these people, we can't make our highest purpose changing them first. We have to make sure we have shifted to the part of the brain where we can access the qualities and characteristics and tools we need to deal with them. Or, answer that question specifically. How do you keep people from stressing you out? See stress for what it is. It's not what somebody or something has done to us. It's just data being sent to the wrong part of the brain. It's a chemical reaction that is basically something we can control. How do you keep people from rattling your cage? Don't stay trapped in a cage that others can rattle. You know, when you get really frustrated, like you're going to work, and then you get to work and you go into a meeting and you're already frustrated, it's real easy for somebody to go, rattle, 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 rattle. And there we go. We say, ah. When we're stuck in that lower 20% of the brain, that's the cage, and people can rattle it very, very easily. I have in my model a way of actually starting off our day like this so that you go into that meeting or into that engagement with that person already in the upper 80% of the brain. That's a much more powerful position. I love this next one. How do you keep people from jerking your chain? Don't give your chain to jerks. Don't you love that? Now, when I'm talking about our chain, I'm talking about who do we look to for approval? Who do we need to care for us, love us, approve of us? And it may be, if that person is stuck in that lower 20% of the brain, you don't want to give them your chain. They're a jerk. They will jerk it. That's why they're called jerks. So what you want to recognize is when people are trapped in this lower 20% of the brain, don't give them your chain. Don't need them to approve of you in that moment. This part of the brain does not approve of people or things. It only finds fault. So, in order to deal with life from this upper 80% of the brain, we need to know what our highest purpose is. What's the most important thing? What's the statement we want to make about who we are, and in a way that we would teach to someone we love. Now, if you want to influence these people, you've got to be willing to get curious about what's behind the mask. See, we've got to be careful about seeing this as the entire being here. This is only who they are when they're trapped in the lower 20% of the brain. You want to find out who they are when they're coming from that upper 80% of the brain. because that's the person you can work with. So when you can see this as, well, they're afraid you won't listen to them. They're afraid you don't like them. They're afraid that you're going to see that they don't know what they're doing. They're afraid that you're going to call them on the fact that maybe you have more information than they do. Have you noticed I put "they're afraid" in front of each one of those descriptors? When we can see these people as frightened, they're coming from the frightened part of the brain, then we can look behind the mask and get curious about who they are when they're not stuck in that lower 20% of the brain, because that's the person we want to engage. That's the person that can hear our thoughts and what we're wanting them to know. So, I love this quote. You love this. It says, true vision is the ability to see in another more than they are showing you. For those of you who have kids, or for those of you who are supervisors and are working with supervisees, sometimes it's really important to see past that fear and past that concern and that resistance. Who are they underneath that, behind the mask? The next thing, this is about how to influence folks. If you are already now clear about this upper 80% of the brain and you want to be more influential with these folks, then I want to give you what I call 4 whats. 4 things you need to know about this person in order to be influential with them. The first one, as we've been talking about all day long, what part of the brain are they coming from? If they are trapped in the brainstem, we don't want to give them data. We don't want to try to be rational with them. And God forbid we tell them to calm down. Calm down, don't tell me to calm down. See, this part of the brain does not want to calm down. It does not want to listen. It just needs to be right and needs you to be wrong. But if we know that, we won't be trying to get them to be a certain way right off the bat. The second thing we want to know is, okay, what's driving this? What perspective or belief or thought or whatever is driving this? We don't have to agree with it, but we have to know what it is. If we want to influence people, we have to start with what is influencing them. They have a certain belief, a certain perspective that they are very attached to. They want to be right about that, and so we do not want to tell them they are wrong. The next thing we need to ask ourselves is, okay, what about this belief can I either agree with or at least understand? Because remember, they think you don't get it, and they think you're going to try to convince them to be different, and that is keeping them from hearing what you're wanting them to know. Now, what we say next is critical. It's the 4th what. What question about the solution and or the future will help them shift from the resistant brain to the receptive brain, from the brainstem to the neocortex? Here's what a lot of people do. They get into discussions or really arguments with people about something that happened in the past. I'm going to encourage you not to go there because they will remember it one way, you will remember it another, and again, here we go, just banging brainstems. But if you can say, okay, given that this is important to you, I'm just wondering how we could do this differently in the future. For those of you who have kids or have supervisees, that's a wonderful question to help people learn. Because some of the times I think when people make a mistake, we're going, what were you thinking? How many times have we talked about that? You stupid idiot. But what I love is a question not about the problem in the past, but about the solution in the future. Here's what I do when I'm working with supervisees. When they make a mistake, or my kids, I'll say, okay, knowing what you know now, how would you do that differently in the future? They come up with brilliant answers because there's no shame in the future. There's no blame in the future. There's no fear in the future. It engages this upper 80%, this creative part of their brain, and they come up with brilliant answers. Matter of fact, there was a situation I'll share with you. It happened to me, happens to a lot of parents. My wife and I, Georgia, we were asleep. And the middle of the night was around 2:30 in the morning. We thought our 16-year-old son, Christopher, was also asleep up in his bedroom. But we got a phone call from the police. Excuse me, are you Christopher Crawford's father? Yes. We have your son handcuffed in the back of our police car. Would you like to come get him? Now, if this had been the 5th time this had happened, or maybe the 4th time, or even the 3rd time, I might have said, no, take him on downtown and let him kind of just get a sense of what this was. But this is the first time he had ever done this. It was very unlike Christopher. So I was kind of confused. I said, yeah, I'll come get him. So I went. It wasn't far. There was a constable, local constable, had found him. And he was handcuffed until he got out of the car. And after I talked to the police and he got into the car, guess what the first thing he said to me was when he got into the car? What's your guess? No. That's what most people say. He said, Dad, can we just talk about how I'm going to do this differently in the future? And I said, yes, we can. Tomorrow morning, you and me and Mom are going to sit down and you're going to walk us through every decision you made and what you'll do differently in the future. And you see, when you do that, that's about their learning. That's about their intelligence. That's about their ability to see what doesn't work and then learn from it. What gets in the way of that is their, and sometimes our, shame and fear and blame. So these can be very powerful questions. We have to be clear about several things in dealing with difficult people. We have to be clear about the statement we want to make about who we are, regardless of what they say or do. We have to be clear about our highest purpose. We have to be clear about how we would be if our kids were watching us and taking notes. Then we have to be clear about what part of the brain they're coming from, what's important to them, what's their belief. What about that we can either understand or agree with, and what question about the solution and the future can we ask to get them to shift to that upper part of the brain and move this discussion from a who's right debate to two people creating something that works for both of us in the future. When we are clear about that, we can go into almost any situation with confidence. I mean, what would that be like? To know that you can go into any interaction with any person for the rest of your life knowing you can be confident in your ability to access those qualities and maybe even get them to shift from that lower brain to the upper brain. It's a wonderful feeling to know that even if I can't get them to shift, I'm going to be able to walk out of that meeting still clear about what's important to me and who I am. This allows us then to access our creativity, because you never know what people are going to say. You know, we kind of think we know, but sometimes they'll go off in a totally different direction. We've got to be able to shift with them and go in that direction, because that's the direction they need to go in order to be able to shift from the brainstem to the neocortex. Hopefully today we've raised our level of awareness about what's going on, that it's not difficult people making us feel a certain way, it's just data being sent to the wrong part of the brain. Good information. There's another quote that I love to end with, and I love it because most people wouldn't expect Albert Einstein to say something like this. He says, you know, there's only two ways to live your life. One as if nothing is a miracle, and the other as if everything is. One as if difficult people, difficult situations make us feel the way they do, and the other as if they provide a pretty miraculous opportunity for us to define ourselves on purpose. One as if there's no purpose in all the crap we have to deal with in dealing with these folks, and the other as if purpose is all that matters. That's why we could call this getting others to get it, or dealing with difficult people on purpose, or as I like to call it, just simply life from the top of the mind. You have been a wonderful group. Thank you for your time.